The plasma bolt missed Jake Morrison's head by inches, scorching the metal bulkhead behind him. He dove behind a cargo container, his rifle clutched tight against his chest, breathing hard. The alien cruiser shuddered as another human missile struck its hull somewhere far above. He shouldn't be here. This was supposed to be a quick extraction mission, grab the data core and get out before the Valkyrie flagship exploded. But then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in a war zone. Crying, not the wailing of wounded soldiers or the screams of the dying. This was different, quieter, younger. Jake peered around the container. The cargo bay stretched before him, filled with smoking debris and flickering emergency lights. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, both human and Valkyrie. The war had been brutal, 3 years of blood and fire across a dozen star systems, but this battle was ending. The Valkyrie fleet was broken, their homeworld conquered, their queen captured. This flagship was the last holdout, and it was going down in flames. The crying came again. Jake moved forward, keeping low, his boots crunching on shattered glass. He rounded another container and froze. There, huddled against the wall, was a child. Not human. Valkyrie. Her skin shimmered with the characteristic blue-silver scales of her species, and her large eyes, wider than any human's, leaked tears that caught the emergency lights like liquid diamonds. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old if Valkyrie aged anything like humans did. Her small hands clutched a torn piece of cloth, maybe a blanket, and her whole body trembled. Jake's finger eased off the trigger. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to complete the mission, to get off this dying ship. But he couldn't look away from those eyes. They held the same terror he'd seen in human children when the Valkyrie had bombed Earth's colonies. The same fear, the same desperate hope for someone, anyone, to help. He approached slowly, weapon lowered. The girl's eyes widened and she pressed herself harder against the wall. Jake held up one hand, palm out, the universal gesture of peace. It seemed to work across species. The Valkyrie child didn't run. Another explosion rocked the ship, closer this time. The deck tilted, and Jake had to grab a support beam to stay upright. His comm crackled to life. "Morrison, where the hell are you? We're pulling out in 2 minutes. Get to the extraction point now." Jake looked at the girl. She stared back at him, understanding somehow that this human held her life in his hands. He could leave her, should leave her. The Valkyrie had killed millions of humans. Their war had orphaned countless children on both sides. One more dead alien wouldn't change anything. But Jake had a daughter back on Earth, 6 years old. Same age as this girl. He thought of her smile, her laughter, how she'd hug him and call him Daddy when he finally made it home. If she were trapped on an enemy ship, scared and alone, he'd pray someone would help her. He made his decision in a heartbeat. Jake slung his rifle over his shoulder and knelt down, extending his hand toward the Valkyrie child. She looked at his hand, then at his face, searching for something. Trust? Maybe. Or mercy? After a long moment, she reached out and placed her small hand in his. Her skin felt warm, almost human. Jake pulled her gently to her feet and lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. "I've got you," he whispered, not knowing if she understood. "You're safe now." The girl buried her face against his shoulder as Jake ran for the extraction point, carrying not just a child, but maybe, just maybe, the first step toward peace. The human transport ship rattled through the debris field, putting distance between itself and the dying Valkyrie flagship. Jake sat in the rear compartment, still holding the girl. The other soldiers stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. Lieutenant Brandon Cole, his squad leader, approached with crossed arms and a hard expression. "What the hell were you thinking, Morrison?" Cole demanded. "We don't take prisoners anymore, especially not their kind." Jake met his gaze without flinching. "She's a child. She's Valkyrie," Cole shot back. "Her people glassed New Boston. They killed your brother. Or did you forget?" Jake hadn't forgotten. The memory of his brother's death haunted him every day, but looking at the frightened child in his arms, he couldn't make her pay for her species' crimes. "She didn't glass anything. She's just scared." Cole shook his head in disgust and walked away. The other soldiers turned back to their equipment, muttering. Jake felt their judgment like a physical weight, but he didn't care. The girl had fallen asleep against his chest, exhausted from terror. Her small chest rose and fell with steady breaths. Something about that simple rhythm calmed him. The transport docked with the human carrier Valkyrie 2 hours later. Medical personnel rushed forward to check the returning soldiers for injuries. A stern-faced doctor, Claire Bennett, stopped when she saw the Valkyrie child in Jake's arms. "What is that doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. "She needs medical attention," Jake said firmly. "She's malnourished and dehydrated." Dr. Bennett hesitated, professional duty warring with personal feelings. Finally, she sighed. "Bring her to Bay 3. I'll examine her there, away from the main medical ward. Some of our wounded wouldn't react well to seeing a Valkyrie." Jake carried the girl through the carrier's corridors, ignoring the shocked stares and angry whispers. In the isolated medical bay, Dr. Bennett ran her scanner over the child, frowning at the readings. "She's definitely malnourished. Probably been hiding on that ship for days, maybe weeks. Her people must have forgotten about her when they evacuated." "Can you help her?" Jake asked. "I can stabilize her," Bennett replied. "But what happens after that? We can't just keep an enemy alien on a military vessel. Command will want answers." As if summoned by her words, the bay doors hissed open. Commander Patricia Hayes entered, her uniform crisp despite the long battle. Her eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on the Valkyrie child. "Soldier, explain yourself." Jake stood at attention, careful not to disturb the girl who had woken and now clung to him with surprising strength. "Ma'am, I found this child on the flagship. She was alone and terrified. I couldn't leave her to die." "Couldn't or wouldn't?" Hayes asked. "You violated direct orders. You compromised the mission. You brought an enemy combatant onto this ship. She's not a combatant, ma'am. She's a child." Hayes studied him for a long moment. "Your compassion is noted, Morrison, but this complicates matters considerably. We've just concluded negotiations with what's left of the Valkyrie government. They've surrendered unconditionally. Their queen, Ashira, is being held on this very ship, awaiting transfer to Earth for trial." Jake's heart skipped. "The queen is here?" "In the detention level," Hayes confirmed. "Under heavy guard, she's considered the architect of this war, responsible for billions of deaths. The tribunal will likely sentence her to execution." The commander paused, studying the child. "Interesting. The girl has the royal markings. See those golden patterns on her neck scales? That's unique to the Valkyrie royal bloodline." The realization hit Jake like a physical blow. This wasn't just any child. This was the queen's daughter, a princess. He looked down at the girl, who stared back at him with those impossibly large eyes, and understood the magnitude of what he'd done. Dr. Bennett stepped forward. "Commander, regardless of her lineage, this child needs rest and nutrition. Whatever political implications exist can wait until she's stable." Hayes nodded slowly. "Agreed. But Morrison, you'll remain with the child. You brought her here. You're responsible for her. And prepare yourself. When the queen learns her daughter is alive, things are going to get complicated." The commander laughed, and Jake sat down heavily in a nearby chair, the weight of the situation settling over him. The girl shifted in his arms, looking up at him. She spoke for the first time, her voice soft and melodic despite the alien cadence. "Thank you." Jake blinked in surprise. "You speak English?" "Mother taught me," the girl replied, her words carefully pronounced. "She said humans would be important, that I should understand them." Her eyes filled with tears again. "Where is Mother? Is she here?" "They took her away during the battle. I hid, but then I couldn't find her." Jake's throat tightened. How could he explain that her mother was imprisoned, awaiting trial for war crimes? That humans wanted her dead for what she'd done? He settled for a partial truth. "Your mother is safe. She's on this ship." The girl's face brightened with hope so pure it hurt to see. "Can I see her, please? I've been so scared I thought she was dead." "I thought everyone was dead. What's your name?" Jake asked gently. "Lyra," she answered. "I'm Princess Lyra, daughter of Queen Ashira. But Mother always just called me her little star." Fresh tears spilled down her scaled cheeks. "I want my mother." Jake made another decision that would change everything. He stood, still carrying Lyra, and looked at Dr. Bennett. "I'm taking her to see the Queen." Bennett's eyes widened. "Morrison, you can't. The detention level is restricted. You'll be arrested." "Then I'll be arrested," Jake said. "But I'm not going to keep a terrified child from her mother. War or no war, that's wrong." He carried Lyra out of the medical bay, his determination overriding common sense. The girl clung to him, hope radiating from her small form. As they moved through the carrier's corridors toward the detention level, Jake wondered what would happen when mother and daughter reunited. Would it change anything? Could one moment of humanity bridge the gap between two species that had slaughtered each other for years? He was about to find out. The detention level of the Valkyrie was a stark contrast to the rest of the ship. Cold, gray walls lined with reinforced cells, each protected by energy barriers that hummed with lethal voltage. Armed guards stood at regular intervals, their weapons ready, their faces hard. They'd all lost friends to the Valkyrie. Mercy wasn't something they had in abundance. Jake approached the checkpoint, Lyra still in his arms. The guard, a young corporal named Danny Price, raised his rifle. "Halt! This area is restricted. What are you doing here, Morrison?" "I need to see the Queen," Jake said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Price laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've lost it. Get back to your quarters before I report you." Lyra chose that moment to speak, her voice cutting through the tension. "Please. I need to see my mother. Please don't keep us apart." Price's expression faltered. He lowered his rifle slightly, staring at the child. "Is that the Queen's kid?" Princess Lyra, Jake confirmed. "I found her on the flagship. She's been alone for weeks, terrified and starving. All she wants is to see her mother." "Are you really going to stand in the way of that?" The corporal struggled with the decision, his training fighting against his conscience. Finally, he stepped aside. 5 minutes. That's all I can give you. If anyone asks, I'll say you overpowered me." "Thank you," Jake said sincerely. He moved past the checkpoint and down the corridor. The cells held various Valkyrie prisoners, mostly military officers captured during the final battle. They watched Jake pass with expressions ranging from hatred to curiosity. At the end of the corridor, in the largest cell, sat Queen Ashira. Jake had seen her image in intelligence briefings, but those hadn't prepared him for seeing her in person. She was tall, perhaps 7 feet, with scales that shimmered in deeper blue hues than her daughter's. Her eyes, the same large and expressive eyes that Lyra had, held a terrible sadness. She wore simple prison garments stripped of the royal regalia she'd once commanded. Her hands were bound with energy cuffs. When she looked up and saw Jake approaching, those eyes narrowed with suspicion. Then she saw Lyra. The queen's entire body went rigid. Her eyes widened impossibly, and a sound escaped her throat, something between a gasp and a sob. She stood so quickly she nearly fell, her bound hands reaching toward the energy barrier that separated her from her child. Lyra? Her voice broke on the name. My star? Is it truly you? Lyra burst into tears. Mother! Mother, I'm here! Jake approached the barrier, and the guard monitoring the cell, a sergeant named Kevin Hart, stood up in alarm. What the hell is going on? Drop the barrier, Jake ordered. Hart stared at him. Are you insane? That's the enemy queen. She stays locked up. Look at her, Jake said, his voice intense. Look at them both. You have a family, Hart. I've seen the pictures in your locker. Your wife. Your 2 boys. If you were locked away from them, wouldn't you want someone to show mercy? The sergeant's jaw clenched. He looked at the queen, at the child, at the raw emotion radiating from both. His hand hovered over the barrier control. This is against every regulation. I know, Jake said softly, but it's the right thing to do. Hart pressed the control. The energy barrier flickered and died. Queen Ashira didn't hesitate. Despite her bound hands, she dropped to her knees as Jake set Lyra down. The little girl ran to her mother, and they collided in an embrace that transcended species, transcended war, transcended everything that had brought them to this moment. The queen sobbed openly, cradling her daughter against her chest, her bound hands stroking Lyra's hair. She spoke in her native language, words that sounded like music and grief combined. Lyra clung to her, small body shaking with the force of her crying. They stayed like that for long moments, reunited after weeks of thinking each other dead. Finally, Queen Ashira looked up at Jake, tears streaming down her scaled face. When she spoke, her English was perfect, touched with an accent that made each word sound formal and precise. You brought her to me. You, a human soldier. Why? Jake met her gaze. Because she's a child who needed her mother. Because I have a daughter the same age back on Earth. Because maybe it's time we all remembered that. Before we were enemies, we were just people trying to protect the ones we love. The queen stared at him, something shifting in her expression. She pulled Lyra closer, as if afraid Jake would take her away. They will kill me. Your people. They will execute me for what I've done, for the orders I gave. I do not dispute that I deserve such a fate. But my daughter, she is innocent. She had no part in this war. Her voice dropped to a desperate whisper. Please, I beg you, protect her. When I am gone, do not let them punish her for my crimes. Jake felt the weight of her plea. He'd never expected to feel sympathy for the alien queen responsible for so much human suffering, but standing here, watching a mother hold her child, knowing their time together was measured in minutes before guards came to separate them again, he couldn't help but see the tragedy of it all. I'll do what I can, he promised. But you need to do something too. You need to tell your people to stand down completely. Hello. No more resistance, no more fighting. Give humanity a reason to show mercy. Ashira nodded slowly. I have already ordered the ceasefire. All Velkari forces have surrendered. But my people are broken. We cannot fight any more. You have won. What comes next is entirely in human hands. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Commander Hayes appeared, flanked by 6 armed soldiers. Her expression was unreadable as she took in the scene, the disabled barrier, the Queen holding her daughter, Jake standing guard over them both. "I should have you court-martialed, Morrison," Hayes said quietly. "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied, "but I'd do it again." Hayes studied him for a long moment, then looked at the Queen and child. Something in her hard expression softened just slightly. "The brass is going to hear about this. They're sending a delegation from Earth. The tribunal will convene in 3 days to decide the Queen's fate." She paused. "And the child's?" Queen Ashira's arms tightened around Lyra. "What will become of my daughter?" "That depends," Hayes said, "on many things. On whether your surrender holds, on whether humanity can find it in itself to show mercy to the innocent, even if they share blood with our enemies." She looked at Jake. "Morrison, you've started something here. I hope you understand that." Jake understood perfectly. He'd taken one scared child and potentially changed the course of history. Whether for better or worse, he'd find out soon enough. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Jake was confined to quarters, technically under arrest but treated with surprising leniency. Lyra remained in the medical bay under Dr. Bennett's care, though she asked for Jake constantly. The child had bonded with him, seeing him as her savior, the human who'd brought her back to her mother. Queen Ashira remained in detention, but the rules had changed. She was allowed supervised visits with Lyra, brief moments where mother and daughter could be together. Jake watched one of these visits through the observation window. The Queen sat on the floor of her cell, barrier down but guards surrounding her, while Lyra curled in her lap. They spoke softly in their native language, and even though Jake couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. A mother was trying to prepare her child for a future without her. Dr. Bennett joined him at the window. "The delegation from Earth arrived an hour ago. The tribunal convenes tomorrow morning. Morrison, you're going to be called to testify." "What should I say?" Jake asked. "The truth," Bennett replied. "Tell them what you saw. Tell them why you did what you did. But be prepared. There are people on that tribunal who lost everything to the Valkyrie. They want blood. They want justice. They're not interested in mercy." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He thought about his brother, killed in the bombing of New Boston. He thought about his daughter back on Earth, waiting for him to come home. He thought about Lyra, a child caught between 2 worlds, neither of which wanted her. And he thought about Queen Ashira, a leader who'd made terrible choices but loved her daughter with the same fierce devotion any human mother would. The tribunal convened in the carrier's main briefing room, hastily converted into a courtroom. 5 judges sat at the elevated bench, all decorated officers who'd fought through the war. The lead judge, Admiral Richard Stone, was a legend. He'd commanded the defense of Earth when the Valkyrie first attacked. Half his face was scarred from plasma burns. He had every reason to hate the aliens. Queen Ashira was brought in, still in energy cuffs, flanked by guards. She stood straight despite her imprisonment, maintaining her dignity. Her eyes scanned the room until they found Lyra, who sat in the front row next to Dr. Bennett. The child clutched a small stuffed animal Bennett had found for her. When Lyra saw her mother, she started to cry silently. The charges were read: war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. The evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of recorded orders from the Queen herself, authorizing attacks on civilian targets, approving weapons that violated every rule of war. The prosecution, led by a hard-eyed captain named Nicole Fisher, laid it all out with brutal efficiency. "This creature," Fisher said, pointing at Ashira, "is responsible for the deaths of over 2 billion human beings. She ordered the glassing of 17 colonies. She authorized the use of biological weapons on Earth itself. She prosecuted this war with ruthless efficiency, targeting not just military installations but schools, hospitals, and residential areas. There is no defense for such actions. There can be only one sentence: death. The room erupted in agreement. Every human present had lost someone. Every human present wanted revenge. Admiral Stone banged his gavel for order. "Does the accused wish to speak?" Stone asked. Queen Ashira stood. When she spoke, her voice carried across the room with surprising strength. "I do not deny my crimes. I do not ask for mercy for myself. I ordered those attacks. I prosecuted the war with every weapon at my disposal. I did this because I believed, wrongly, that humanity posed an existential threat to my species. I was afraid. That fear drove me to commit acts I now recognize as unforgivable." She paused, her eyes finding Lyra again. "But I ask this court to remember that my daughter is innocent. She had no part in my decisions. She should not pay for my crimes with her life or her freedom." Captain Fisher stood. "The child shares your bloodline. She is Velkari royalty. She represents everything your species stands for." "She represents hope," a voice interrupted. All eyes turned to Jake as he stood. He hadn't been called yet, but he couldn't stay silent. Admiral Stone frowned. "Soldier, you'll speak when called." "With respect, sir, this needs to be said now," Jake insisted. "I'm the one who found Princess Lyra. I'm the one who brought her to her mother, and I'm telling you that if we execute that child, if we punish her for crimes she didn't commit, we become no better than the monsters we fought against." Stone's scarred face darkened. "You dare lecture this tribunal on morality?" "I dare speak the truth," Jake shot back. "Yes, the Queen committed terrible crimes. Yes, she deserves to face justice for that. But her daughter is 6 years old. 6. The same age as my little girl back home. If we kill her, if we imprison her, if we make her suffer for her mother's choices, what does that say about us? What kind of peace are we building?" Commander Hayes stood. "If I may, Admiral, Private Morrison's actions, while irregular, have had unexpected consequences. Since word spread about the Queen's reunion with her daughter, we've received over 300 communications from Velkari colonies. They're pleading for the child's life. They're offering complete cooperation, full disarmament. Anything we ask. The child has become a symbol to them, a reason to hope that peace might be possible." Fisher shook her head. "A symbol that could rally resistance in the future. A royal heir around which rebellion could form. Or," Jake said, "a symbol that humanity can be merciful, that we can be better than our worst impulses. That peace is possible." He looked directly at Admiral Stone. "Sir, you've been fighting this war longer than anyone. You've seen more death than any of us. Don't you want it to end? Really end? Not just the fighting, but the hatred? This child could be the bridge we need." The room fell silent. Admiral Stone stared at Jake for a long moment, then at Queen Ashira, then at the small Velkari child clutching her stuffed animal. The Admiral's scarred face was unreadable. "This tribunal will recess," Stone announced. "We will reconvene in 1 hour with our judgment." The longest hour of Jake's life followed. He sat with Lyra while the judges deliberated. The child held his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Will they hurt my mother?" she asked softly. Jake didn't know how to answer. He settled for honesty. "They're very angry at her. She did bad things. But I hope they'll remember that you're innocent." "If they take Mother away forever," Lyra whispered, "will you stay with me? You saved me once. Would you save me again?" Jake's heart broke. I promise. Whatever happens, you won't be alone. The tribunal reconvened. Everyone stood as the judges entered. Admiral Stone took his seat, his expression grave. The room held its collective breath. "This tribunal has reached a decision," Stone began. "Queen Ashira, you are guilty of war crimes beyond measure. The evidence is irrefutable. The suffering you caused cannot be calculated. For these crimes, you will be sentenced to life imprisonment in a secure facility on Earth. You will never again command armies or make decisions that affect the lives of others. This is our judgment." A murmur ran through the room. Life imprisonment, not execution. It was more mercy than anyone expected. But Stone wasn't finished. "As for Princess Lyra," he continued, and the room went deadly silent. "This tribunal recognizes that a child cannot be held responsible for her parents' crimes. Furthermore, we acknowledge the strategic value of showing mercy in this instance. The child will be placed in protective custody. She will be educated and cared for with the ultimate goal of returning her to her people when she comes of age, to lead them in a new era of peace between our species." Lyra burst into tears, but these were tears of relief. Queen Ashira's legs gave out, and guards had to hold her up. She looked at her daughter, then at Jake, and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Stone pointed his gavel at Jake. "Private Morrison, your actions were insubordinate and violated multiple regulations. However, they also demonstrated the kind of moral courage that makes humanity worth defending. You will face no charges. Instead, you are hereby assigned as Princess Lyra's guardian and protector. You brought her into our world. You will help her navigate it." Jake stood, shocked. "Sir, I'm just a soldier." "You're the soldier who reminded us we're fighting for something more than revenge," Stone replied. "Don't make me regret this decision." The tribunal adjourned. In the chaos that followed, Jake found himself surrounded by people, some congratulating him, others condemning him. But he only cared about 2. He made his way to where guards held Queen Ashira, waiting to take her to Earth. Lyra had been allowed one final embrace with her mother. The queen looked at Jake over her daughter's head. "You gave me something I never expected to have again. Hope, not for myself, but for her, for my people, for a future where our species might coexist in peace." She pulled back to look at Lyra. "My little star, you must be brave now. This human, Jake, he will protect you. Trust him as you trust me. Learn from the humans. Help our people understand them. Can you do this?" Lyra nodded through her tears. "I promise, Mother. I'll make you proud." "You already have," Ashira whispered. She kissed her daughter's forehead, then looked at Jake once more. "Protect her with your life. Teach her to be better than I was. Help her build the peace I destroyed." "I will," Jake promised. Guards led the queen away. Lyra watched until her mother disappeared from sight, then turned and buried her face against Jake's chest, sobbing. He held her, the small alien child who'd become his responsibility, his charge, his chance to do something right in a war that had seen so much wrong. Dr. Bennett approached. "Morrison, you realize what you've taken on? This child will need years of care, protection, education. She'll face prejudice, hatred, maybe even assassination attempts. Her life will never be normal. Neither will mine," Jake said quietly. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe normal isn't what we need right now." The news spread quickly. The human soldier who'd saved the enemy princess. The reunion that had softened hearts on both sides. The judgment that had chosen mercy over vengeance. It became a story people told, a symbol of what peace might look like. 3 months later, Jake stood on Earth for the first time in 4 years. Lyra held his hand as they walked down the transport ramp, both nervous about what waited. A crowd had gathered, and Jake's heart sank, expecting protests, anger, violence. Instead, they found something else. Humans and Velkhari standing together. Not many Velkhari yet, but enough. Refugees, diplomats, those brave enough to trust in the fragile peace. They held signs, messages of hope, pictures of Lyra and her mother, symbols of reconciliation. And there, at the front of the crowd, stood Jake's daughter, his little Sarah, 6 years old, holding a homemade welcome sign. Next to her stood Jake's wife, Amy, tears streaming down her face. Jake ran to them, pulling them both into his arms, Lyra still holding his hand. Sarah looked at the Velkhari child with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, is this the princess you saved?" Sarah asked. "This is Lyra," Jake confirmed. "She's going to be staying with us." Sarah smiled, a pure, innocent expression that knew nothing of war or hatred. She held out her hand to Lyra. "Hi, I'm Sarah. Do you want to be friends?" Lyra stared at the offered hand, then at Sarah's smile, then at Jake. He nodded encouragingly. Slowly, the Velkhari princess reached out and took the human child's hand. "I would like that very much," Lyra said softly. The two girls, one human and one alien, walked hand in hand toward Jake's family home. Behind them, their parents followed, and behind them, two species that had been at war watched and wondered if maybe, just maybe, peace was possible after all. It wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was long, filled with challenges, setbacks, and the lingering ghosts of conflict. But it had begun with one soldier's choice to see a child instead of an enemy, to show mercy instead of revenge, to carry hope out of the burning wreckage of war. Jake Morrison looked up at the sky, thinking of all those who'd died, all those who'd sacrificed, all those who'd believed in something better. He hoped they could see this. He hoped they'd understand. He'd gone to war to protect humanity. He'd come home having saved it by protecting the enemy. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier could do wasn't to fight, but to choose compassion when the whole world demanded blood. As the sun set on Earth, casting long shadows across a healing world, two children played in a yard, their laughter mixing, their differences forgotten in the simple joy of being young and alive and together. And in a secure facility far away, Queen Ashira heard the reports, saw the images, and wept tears of gratitude. Her daughter would live. Her people would survive. And maybe, in time, they'd find a way to forgive themselves for the terrible things they'd done. The war was over. The hard work of peace had just begun. But for the first time in 3 years, both species had reason to hope. And it all started because one human soldier heard a child crying and decided to listen.